a global menace, not of a single country or one continent. With China's experience in dealing with the outbreak, what are the hard lessons that could help other countries? What kind of challenges are we facing ahead together? And what else could be done to curb the COVID-19 spread through international cooperation? To discuss these and more, I'm joined via satellite by Michele Geraci, the former Undersecretary of State from Italian Ministry of Economic Development in Rome, and Gambar Naderi, a columnist with Keihan International in Tehran. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Zhong Shi in Beijing. So the new coronavirus has found its way to every continent except Antarctica. For people that might have been under the impression that if China and maybe its neighbor Japan had gotten hold of the situations, the rest of the world, much of the rest of the world, might be spared from this epidemic. This is simply a new reality that they have to accept. The question now, are they ready? Gentlemen, before we go into specific countries and regions, let me ask you this, starting with you, Mr. Geraci. The WHO announced on the 27th that the number of new infections outside China had surpassed that in China, a clear signal of the spread of COVID-19. Your take on this global trend?
Indeed, and that shows, like you just mentioned, that the virus is not limited to country borders. The fact that these statistics has happened just now, let's say about a month and a half, also gives researchers some indication of how long it takes from the center of the infection, Wuhan, to spread into parts of the world like Europe, 8,000 kilometers away. And yes, it is now a big worry that we have in the region in Europe. And we are looking at what China has done to prevent, contain, and manage this tragedy in a way, because let's not forget, we are also talking about people's lives, people sick. There's also lots of very sad personal stories, and we are now trying to get on top of the situation that is new, and it has in a way taken Europe, Italy by surprise. Maybe a little bit of underestimating the danger of this spread, notwithstanding what experts and even the World Health Organization has said that this cannot really be contained. And in the era of globalization with travels, goods and people, the world now faces a new challenge.
We'll come to how Italy deals with the surprise later in our program. But now, Mr. Naderi, I want to get your take on this global threat of COVID-19.
Well, Jean, as your distinguished guest made it absolutely clear, this is the price we are paying for globalization and multilateralism. This was unavoidable. It is not the fault of any single, country or a group of countries. It just came out of nowhere, and we have to fight together. We have to respect each other's borders. We have to respect each other's cultures and communities. And at the same time, we should work together to fight it out, because that's the only way we can win this battle against this new disease. But if you're asking about Iran, Iran has been immensely affected. There are no shutdowns at the moment, Jean, but all schools, universities and public places have been closed. From tomorrow morning we will have online and distance learning for our school children and of course our university students. At the same time, there are only travel bans for those who have been diagnosed with the disease. Speaking of those who have been affected, even our top health officials and vice president has been diagnosed with the coronavirus.
Both of you mentioning globalization there. This is exactly why people are talking about the far-reaching implications of the outbreak of COVID-19 in 2020. This might boost some people's agenda when it comes to their fight, their opposition to globalization. Mr. Naderi, I want to talk to you about what's going on in Iran. What sets Iran apart is, first, an incredibly high death rate there, close to 10%. That rate in China is somewhere around 2%. Now, this could mean that there are far more infections in Iran that have yet to be discovered. For outsiders looking in, the situation in Iran looks a little murky. Help us understand a clearer picture of Iran and what it's dealing with right now.
Young, unfortunately, 26 people have lost their lives so far. Many cities have been affected. We have reports of coronavirus impacting more than 200 or 300 people. That's the official figures. Some people say it could be more than that, but we just don't know. The good news is that we are slowly but steadily walking towards the warm weather in the spring. That's why there is still hope there. Not all hope is lost. For the time being, 45 days, schools are going to be shut down, including universities, cultural events. Even for the first time, Zhang, in 41 years, Friday prayers were cancelled across the nation. That's how immensely this virus has affected the Iranian communities by and large. So this is not just about this or that city, it's about the whole nation. And speaking of the whole nation, the good news is that the government doesn't believe that shutdown is the way forward. Our businesses are still up and running, people are going to work. The only difference is that we have kept our children at home. They are going to be homeschooled, and at the same time we will have distance learning and of course online schools for our children from tomorrow morning. So we are doing our bit, and at the same time, I think we have to learn our lessons from the Chinese government and the way they have been successfully containing this major disease. I think we have a lot to learn from China.
You mentioned this earlier as well, that some of Iran's government officials, rather high-ranking government officials, are coming down with the disease. We're talking about a vice president. We're talking about the deputy minister of health there. This might deal a blow psychologically to Iranians, keeping a close eye on the situation there. Government people, government officials, they're supposed to be the better informed. They're supposed to be better prepared. They're supposed to be leading the national campaign to curb the spread of COVID-19. Now, if they are confirmed to be infected, does that tell us about the preparedness of Iran in fighting this epidemic?
Well, Zhang, we are not as big as China. If China cannot defeat this virus, no other nation on earth is going to be able to defeat the coronavirus, the so-called COVID-19. Yes, Iran has made mistakes. Some officials have made mistakes, but we are trying to catch up. We are learning our lessons from the Chinese authorities, and we are learning our lessons fast. For instance, the government, the health ministry officials have banned the sale of face masks, alcohol, and of course other sanitary items. These items are only available in medical centers and hospitals that are designated to treat patients with the coronavirus disease. So this is one of the ways that the government is trying to stop people from stacking up on sensitive items like face masks, and we have succeeded so far. But as I told you, this is just the beginning of the campaign in Iran against the virus. We have a lot to go. A lot is going to happen from now on. But as I told you, we are not panicking. The government is not panicking, and people are actually cooperating. If they have problems, if they see any signs of disease, they immediately go to hospitals to have themselves checked. So that's the good news. There is some kind of trust between the public and the government. But as you just mentioned, we need to see that our officials are up to the job. And the good news is that those who have been affected have been replaced by their deputies. So yes, their fight is going on. Officials are helping the nation. The whole thing is in control, under control, and nobody is panicking, Zhang. But as I told you, we are still at the earliest stage of containing this deadly disease.
I think it's fair to say that for any country, any government, this is not the time to lay blame. Time is of essence here for governments to find solutions and tangible measures to keep their people safe. Now, Mr. Geraci, coming to you now. Italy is the largest outbreak, has the largest outbreak outside of Asia. It's the hardest hit EU country there. So far, the infections are concentrated in the northern industrial region of Lombardy and, of course, Veneto. What's the word in Italy right now? What's its atmosphere?
The atmosphere has been one of a surprise over the last 7 days, because this is a sudden increase in the number of people affected by the disease, an increase that should be really perceived. It's not that everyone got sick like last weekend. Probably some people were traveling probably from China, probably from the provinces in China that have closer business ties with Italy. And in fact, if you do an analysis of where the people have been affected in the north and northeast of Italy, Lombardy, Veneto, these are the two regions of Italy that have most business relationship with China. Together they represent a large part of Italian exports to China. Lots of Italian travel to the region. And so it seems that all the more than 500 people affected are all Italians. So this is not something that happened suddenly. It's something that was recorded suddenly. So I think there was a little bit of delay in the Italian government to track those arrivals. Suddenly, once you start worrying about something, you start measuring temperature and do the test to everyone, and suddenly you found out things that, however, had happened over the previous few days and a few weeks. I'm not an expert on medicine issues, but it seems that the number of people who have unfortunately died, they were old, already affected by previous disease. Italy also has a very large ratio of old to young people. We have a demographic problem. And so in a way, the high number of people that has fallen into Italy can also be related to those two reasons, the ties with China and the high level, the high average age of people. But I would like to say also that in Europe and around the world, the Italian health system is perceived as one of the best. It's free, high quality. Part of the trade we do with China is also about medical equipment. And so this gives us a level of comfort that we can deal with this. Of course, we cannot build a hospital in a week, but if the numbers remain limited, and we hope it does, then I think we can deal with this. Italy now is at a bit of a crossroad. We, of course, have a problem of image. I think the government has taken to extreme, first to worried, then to relaxed. I think the Italian people also need to take this issue a little bit more seriously. I was just walking in Rome before coming to the studio now, and the only people who were wearing masks were Korean, Asian tourists. And this gives you an idea of the different level of attention that people in Asia and in fact in Korea attach to this issue, while the average Italian person seems to not care so much. So we need to work a lot on the perception, and as I always say, best to be safe than sorry. Money will come back later if we lose a little bit of
Italy will remain limited there. I do want to talk to you about the lockdown in Lombardy and Veneto, which is something the Italian government has moved swiftly to implement. Now, for any country or government, that is not an easy decision to make. There's a price to pay, and often it's the people that are quarantined, that are held back within the lockdown, that pay that price. Help us understand the rationale behind the decision, and what has the lockdown achieved?
There's been a heated debate between experts and government. Of course, any government does not want to take these measures until they find it necessary. The problem is when it's necessary, it's already a little bit too late. So the reaction of the Italian government has been to try to catch up with time and take a more extreme approach to lock down those cities. You are right in saying that the people pay the price for it, just like the Wuhan people are paying maybe a higher price. But this is in exchange for the safety of their own families. The people who are in the lockdown, they don't just are not just there to prevent them from spreading the disease to the rest of Italy, but also for their own situation, so that they do not mix with each other. And indeed, as it is in this virus situation, it is a cluster of sick people that needs to be contained. And the experts have told the government, the Italian government, the only way to deal with this virus is to isolate. So quarantine is the only measure. If I was in the government, I probably would have done it more. Maybe less media visible, because the media has as often exaggerated in reporting it. I would have done more without saying in such maybe colorful ways. So the lockdown needs to be extended. We have suspended football match, people from attending football matches. The furniture fair in Milan has been postponed. Now we hear that Ginevra show is also been postponed. So all the gatherings of people need to be, in a way, halted. I'm now worried that the Italian government is now thinking of reopening up things. So now we have restaurants and bars in Milan, the cathedral in Milan being reopened on Monday. I'm a little bit dubious about this. Once we have taken the path to deal with this issue, there are no indications that the situation is entirely under control, and so swinging to the complete relaxation of measure could be another error again on the other side. So this is the thing, the government is swinging from one extreme to another one with no clear direction. And I've invited them, I was getting in touch with members of the government just yesterday, to look at what China has done, learn a little bit from the Chinese experience. We have, of course, different systems, but there are lessons that surely can be learned. But the population needs to be aware that this is, high contagious, no high mortality issue. So it's easy to get sick. It's not so easy to be grievously ill. But the only way to stop it is to contain travels. And that's why, when you ask me, is the Italian government doing the right thing or not to contain things, the worry that I have is also that this decision
to do that, you need the awareness of the Italian people as well as the Italian government there. Of course, Mr. Naderi, I want to come to you now. You mentioned that Iran has a lot to learn from China. Now, at the height of the outbreak in China, at the start of February, the Iranian government delivered medical supplies to China through the Red Crescent Society, mainly facial masks. China has reciprocated with its own shipment of medical supplies to Iran, now that Iran is dealing with an outbreak there. Also, what more can China do to help Iran?
Well, Zhang, as you just mentioned, His Excellency Chang, who are the Chinese ambassador in Tehran, he tweeted in the early hours of today that 20,000 coronavirus detection kits were handed out to Iranian government here in the capital, Tehran. And he also tweeted that 250,000 face masks were sent to Iran. I think the Chinese government and the people of China, and of course the embassy here, have done a marvelous job in helping us through thick and thin, and today was not an exception. China was there when the whole Western world didn't help Iran see the economic benefits of the nuclear deal with the world powers back in 2015. China refused to listen to the orders or take orders from the US government, Trump administration, when they walked out of the nuclear deal to impose sanctions on Iran. So China has always been there as a good and reliable and trustworthy partner with Iran, and today is not an exception. As I told you, we are learning. For instance, it is because of the lessons learned from China that the Iranian government shut down all universities and schools. Now, thanks to the successful example of China, people are going to start getting involved in distance learning and online schools from tomorrow morning. So because if it worked there, there is no reason to think that it won't be working here. Even Japan is doing the same thing. Even France is considering, shutting down all the schools and universities and start, homeschooling. So this is one of the biggest lessons that we have learned, that we need to minimize the risk of exposing the general public, especially children, to this deadly disease. And the best possible thing to do is to not to let them go to school and keep them at home and help them learn their lessons while they are at the safety of their own homes. That's just one of the things. And remember, Jean, we only had 15 detection kits for coronavirus a couple of days ago. Now we have 20,000 kits that have been sent from China. That is a huge humanitarian response and reciprocation by the Chinese government and the people of China and the great nation of China. I think we are very thankful for that, and I hope that the government will keep that in mind from now on, because as I told you, this is a globalization trend. This is a global economy. We need to work together through thick and thin, and if something happens, we are going to help each other because we have no choice. Remember, at this age and time, if China sneezes, the whole world is going to catch cold. That's why globalization is not just about making money and doing business. It's also at these times of crisis that we need to help each other and make sure that nothing is going to be politicized because of this or that government's order. And the good news is that even the World Health Organization is helping Iran. Even the Swiss government is sending us medical supplies. We know that because of sanctions, we haven't been able to get medical supplies for cancer patients. But from now on, the good news is that we are going to get not just for cancer patients, but also those who are suffering from the coronavirus disease. So yes, thank China, thank the Embassy of China here, and thank to the great nation of China for helping us in these desperate times.
It's a positive development that Iran is seeing easing sanctions there so that companies can send in food and medicine, as people need it. And as the China experience will tell you, those testing kits you talked about will play a vital role in identifying the people that need the most critical care going forward. Mr. Geraci, we've been talking about Italy as an individual country, but COVID-19 is spreading across Europe. Many of European countries have reported their first infections, which can be traced back to people who've been to Italy. Talking about the EU efforts here, do you think there have been enough coordination and cooperation across the European Union as a bloc to deal with the spread of COVID-19?
No. I think and I fear there's been a very little cooperation because the European Union is locked into the philosophy that is at the fundamental of the European Union itself, which is a free movement of people. And once you have this frame of mind, it's very hard psychologically for European leaders to accept that the only way to solve this problem is to stop or limit people's movement. So that's the philosophical contradiction, and that's why this idea is left to individual countries. We have been talking about the Schengen, suspend or not the Schengen treaty, which basically means that when people cross from Italy to France into Germany, they should be able to do it only after showing passport and maybe even checking temperature and so on, while at the moment you can just drive and you don't even know in which country you are because there are completely no borders. And this has been the fundamental pillar, one of the fundamental pillars of the European Union. And so it is very difficult for the EU leaders to undo that in order to block it. And so individual countries do them by themselves, and we have, this is what's happening. Everyone does what they think. Italy is debating Schengen, yes or no. The UK is checking arrivals from Italy. Bulgaria is, I think, stopping flights. Romania is refusing entry. Israel is refusing entry to anyone who's been in Italy, and so on. So every country is taking their own measures, which is unfortunate. But it is the way of the reality of international politics. It will take longer for 28 countries to agree. It's not ideal, but it's better than nothing. Every country takes its own measure.
I want to pick both your minds on an economic perspective here, starting with you, Mr. Geraci. Is the European Union still trying to strike that balance between containing this epidemic and maybe avoiding panic and economic disruptions there on the continent, or is it too occupied now, for now, to curb the spread of the virus? It hasn't really thought about the economic implications, the economic impact here.
Oh no, I have been looking at the economic impact of the virus and everything else, and I have actually very serious numbers for the European and for the Italian economy. We are looking at a serious loss of many industries such as tourism. We already have many cancellation of travelers into Italy, and the tourism in Italy is about 5% of the GDP direct, more if we look at all indirect sectors. So if only we have a decline in tourism of 10%, we already knock 0.5% of GDP. I actually have worries about those trade, exports to China, Chinese supply into the manufacturing companies in Italy could also be affected. So we are looking at 1.5, 2% even GDP loss for Italy directly from the virus. So the thing that worries me more is that the reaction that we have had in Italy, which has been a little bit hysterical, create anxiety in our foreign partners, and this has further amplified the danger. And so I'm very worried that the economic impact on Italy would be very serious beyond the reality, because we all hope that in a couple of months the whole situation will be cleared and tourists and business will come back to Italy, but the damage that the Italian government seems to maybe doing now could be long-lasting, and we are working to tell our friends around the world that Italy remains, as I said, one of the places where the health service is the best, tourism we don't need to say, the beauty and so on. But managing this crisis is easier to do it when we are just talking about it. When you do it, as I knew when I was in the government, it's harder, and it's easy also to criticize people that do things. In a way, we have to give them a little bit of doubt, but the damage could be big. But
I see.
Economy damage, I'm not too worried because money can come back. The reputation damage instead can be long-lasting.
That's true. Mr. Naderi, we have about 30 seconds for you. It's a good thing that Iran is seeing easing sanctions for it to cope with the COVID-19 epidemic. There hasn't had a chance to think about the possible and potential impact this could have on the Iranian economy, which is already struggling under the UN and U.S. sanctions.
Well, Jean, it is going to affect the economy to some extent, no doubt about it, but it is still worth it because we need to make sure that public health and public safety comes first. Money, as your distinguished guest made it absolutely clear, it can come later. Yes, it is going to have some long-lasting impacts on the performance of our economy, especially under the sanctions regime imposed by the United States government, but it is still worth it. I think we need to make sure that people's health and livelihood comes first. So the government is doing a fine job, and by the way, it has learned to be transparent as possible, like the Chinese government. We are trying to be transparent, and that's the good lessons that we have learned from China.
All right, gentlemen, we'll leave you there. Gambar Naderi and Michelle Geraci, thank you so much for joining us today. Please do take good care. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of Dialogue. I'm Zhong Shi in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team here, thank you so much for your company.